All right, everyone. Well, as I said before, I do want to thank everyone for taking time out of their day and joining us for the webinar we have today. I just wanted to talk about the goal of this webinar. The topic obviously is financial literacy. And that being said, we could have people on this webinar who are children. We could have people on this call who are grandparents or parents. And really what we're trying to do is give you the tools to have these conversations with kids or grandkids. Invesco has some fantastic materials, and you're going to see some of that today from Brian Levitt. But again, there are materials that are out there that can really help you have these conversations. And that's really the goal of today, is just to help you as you continue on with your own financial literacy journey, but at the same time, maybe helping to educate others along the way. Before we get started, I do want to share just a few slides to talk about who Cornerstone is, because there's a very good chance that you may not even know who Cornerstone is, because you're thinking my financial advisor is with another firm, or they brand as something else. And so I think what's important to note is just a little bit about who we are. Cornerstone has over 120 advisors in 15 states, and you can see this on the coverage map here. The firm was founded in 2005. We have about $7.3 billion in total client assets that we manage. And our advisors came from 17 different prior firms, all looking for that opportunity to become independent financial advisors and really just be able to deliver the best financial advice to their clients that they possibly could. Now, as I said before, you may have never heard of Cornerstone before because your advisor brands as Vine Wealth Management or Steamboat Financial Group or Triada Advisors or Planify or many of the other names that you see on the screen. And we certainly support our advisors wanting to brand on their own, but some also do fall under the Cornerstone umbrella, but they all affiliate with LPL Financial as their broker dealer. And what LPL really does in this arrangement is not only give them the backbone and the product availability, but that autonomy and that independence to run their business as they see fit. LPL is the number one independent broker dealer in the country with over 21,000 financial advisors. There's over $1 trillion client assets that they manage, and there are 0 proprietary products that are offered. So how does this all fit together for you? Well, your financial advisor, as I mentioned before, has decided to go independent and run an independent practice really for your benefit. LPL acts as the broker-dealer. They custody the assets. They put the statements together for you that you might see either online or in the mail. But what Cornerstone brings to the table is really that support, structure, and scale to allow your financial advisor to spend more time with you. This webinar is a good example of that. We take the planning off of their plate. We take all the compliance approval off of their plate. And all they really have to do is send the email out to you so you can hopefully be better educated. And we, of course, do these throughout the year. I'm sure many of you have been on some of our webinars before. If you do have questions for Brian, the way to ask those questions is by sending an email to cornerstonewm@lpl.com. Those emails will come to me, and I will relay those questions to Brian so he can answer them at the end of the webinar. We'll kind of pause questions until then, but along the way, if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask, maybe you have a difficult teenager and you're trying to teach them better financial literacy, certainly ask those questions, and we are happy to provide any tips that we can along the way. And Brian, I'm going to stop sharing if you want to pull your slides up while I give you a bit of an intro. So, as I mentioned before, we do have Brian Levitt today as our guest speaker, and I will tell you, Brian is a former colleague and friend of mine. Brian and I worked together for about 14 years at a predecessor company to Invesco. Brian was always a great resource for me to bring out into the field and speak with financial advisors. He is now a global market strategist with Invesco, so it's not going to be surprising to you, or shouldn't be surprising to you, if maybe later today you see him on CNBC or Bloomberg TV or Yahoo Finance, or maybe you'll see him quoted in the Wall Street Journal. He is someone who is definitely sought after for his global macro views and global strategy views on markets. But this financial literacy topic was something that was really a bit of a pet project to him. And I think this coincided with the birth of his children and them getting to a point where they might be aware of finances. but was really his baby and something that he put a lot of effort into, and has just developed a tremendous resource to allow people to communicate with their kids, with their grandkids about just being more informed on financial matters. I will tell you just a very, very brief story about this. I took this material and I sat my kids down when they were preteens in the living room, and I shared a number of the slides in here with them. I will tell you that went over as a complete flop. Trying to get preteens to sit through a slide presentation in the living room didn't work out all that well. But I will tell you today that I have two children who are younger than the age of 20 who have already started Roth IRAs. And I have all three of them investing in the market and asking questions and really trying to learn and understand the market. So I'm going to use that maybe as something to open the door to those conversations. But I think you're in for a treat today. So Brian, please, can't talk today. Brian, please take it away.
Yeah, my pleasure, Bill. Maybe your children needed me presenting it to them. So yeah, good. No, but it went over like a lead balloon in my house as well. It went up like a lead balloon. So, but I look forward to presenting this to you. These are the ideas that I was thinking of, to Bill's point, when I was first having children, and some of the things that I felt that we all needed to think about within our family unit and beyond. So the way it's structured it is, everybody's got an accumulation phase. So what are the things that we need to help, accumulate assets or accumulate the things that we want in life? And so how do you get started? How do you defer your gratification? How do you invest it? What are the big decisions you need to make? And then beyond that, what do you need to do to think about protecting it? And ultimately, how do you distribute the wealth? And so if you can get your head around how you think of these three things, you'll likely be in a much better place than a lot of families. Unfortunately, and why I say a lot of families is because studies suggest that we don't really talk about money in our society. We don't talk to the kids about money for a variety of different reasons. We don't want them to worry, or maybe it'll change their values. Maybe they'll discuss it in the wrong company. We hear a lot of people saying they don't even really discuss it with their spouses because he or she doesn't know anything. That's her job. That's his job. Causes stress, and even the grandparents or the generation that had started this, that at the top of this family unit will say, we don't want to talk with them. We don't want them to worry, or maybe they'll misinterpret our intentions. So it was just a society, a challenge that we just don't speak enough about money. And so when my kids were being born, thought was, well, let's think of this like an organization. Let's make sure that everybody has roles and responsibilities within this, so that we're all in the same camp, we're all in the same boat, and nobody thinks that anybody's misinterpreting anybody's intentions, and the next generation starts to get prepared for it. So I said to my wife, we're going to be the co-CEOs of this, and what that means is we need to develop a vision. I think a lot of families don't even necessarily have a vision. What's it all for? What's the purpose of this money? What's the point of it? What do we value? What are we trying to accomplish? And we monitor and report on finances. We make the investments, and we train the next generation of leaders. I mean, really, what a CEO would do within a business unit. The associates, the children, we've thought very hard about what are we going to need to do to educate them to be the future leaders? How are we going to structure them to have jobs and get a salary, whether that's in the home, in the community, or later in a profession? What type of assignments do we give them? They attend our meetings. They're involved in the decisions. And the CEO Emeriti, which are my parents and my in-laws, they promote the family legacy. It's hard to know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. So, we talk a lot to them about what do they value? What does this family unit value? They help distribute the resources to the next generation of leaders, and importantly, prepare us for the future. Far too often, people are very unprepared for when there's loss in the family or there's money passed on, and where are the accounts, what's structured where. And so when you think of it like an organization has a mission statement, they have purpose, they have values, they have plans for the future. And that's how we've tried to run this. Talk a lot about accumulating. Obviously, everybody wants to accumulate money means, but I think it's more than that. I think it's, accumulate the ability to have your own choices, your own freedom, your own happiness. Tolstoy said, and I think this is critical, there's two ways not to suffer from poverty. The first is to acquire more wealth, of course, but the second's to limit your requirements. First one's not always in our power. It's hard. But the second is always in our power. And so accumulating to me isn't just what job's going to pay you the most money and how are you going to invest it. It's also thinking about what matters to you. What do you value? What requirements can you limit so that you're able to save money? So when I think about wealth, people often ask me, what's my number? What am I striving for? And I think that's really the wrong way to look at it. I use this concept of thinking about wealth based on the height of the Burj Khalifa, which was once the world's tallest building, and recognizing that it's all relative. It's all based on your perspective. So, on the left, if you're making close to $600,000 a year, and you're comparing yourself to the world median or the US median, well, you're on the top floor. You're feeling quite good until Patrick Mahomes is on the top floor. And then you're all the way down on the second floor. And Patrick Mahomes is feeling good until Larry Ellison's on the top floor. Larry Ellison's feeling good until Mark Zuckerberg's on the top floor. So there's not a number. I don't think there's a magic number. One of the things I tell people to do is think about it with regards to time. Because then there's two levers that we can pull. What have you saved divided by what does it cost you to live? And your answer, the result is the amount of time. So, if you have $20,000, but it's costing you $5,000 a month to live, you only have a 4-month financial cushion. If you have $10 million and it's costing you $5,000 a month to live, you've got a 2,000-month financial cushion, and you're feeling significantly less frantic. So again, it's not about measuring value based on a number or what you're striving for, because there's two levers we can pull: what we can save and also what it's costing us to live. I always tell people start early. I think this is so critical. It's very hard for younger people, college graduates, to start early because they have, maybe they're not making near what they want to make, and their cost of living can be expensive. But even if you can just start socking away a little bit, it could add up pretty significantly. The example I use here is 4 different people, 10 ages apart. I use the 20,500 annual investment that you could put into a 401k. And say, if you're Jane and you're age 25 and you start contributing that every year, by the time you're 65, you will have contributed $820,000, right? So 20,500 times 40 years. But you would have earned, if the market just returned 6%, which is historically low, you would have earned $2.5 million, right? And so your end sum was close to $3.4 million. Just by putting the 20,500 into the market every year. Again, easier said than done for some people, but trying to get money in as early as possible so that your money can work hard for you. And you can see from Jane's example, that's money working hard for you. She earned $2.5 million on her $820,000 total investment over 40 years. And again, at a 6% return. Markets historically can return 10 to 12%. These numbers look substantially higher if you do that, versus somebody like Susan, who's 45, doesn't start until she's 45, and so she was only able to contribute half of what Jane was able to contribute. But look at how much less she earned. Yes, she only contributed half, but she ended up with what, you know, five or one fifth of what Jane was able to earn because she just didn't have the time in the market. Same returns, she just missed 20 years of compounding that return. So, Adam Smith says it takes money to get money, it takes money to make money. When you have a little, it's easy to get more. How do you get that little? How do you get that little so you can keep putting it into the market over time? And the best way to think about that is how do you defer gratification? The Will Rogers line is very telling. Too many people spend money they haven't earned to buy things they don't want to impress people they don't like. And I think we, all intuitively understand what that means. What are we spending our money on that prevents us from getting investments into the market? I talk a lot about rich and wealthy. Rich, there's been people that have been rich, made significant lifetime earnings, which you see on the left, that went bankrupt. So, rich is, significant lifetime earnings over significant earnings over a short period of time that, you can waste. Wealthy, you don't have to make significant earnings like that, but you can make decisions that allow you to build wealth over time and pass it down across generations. So when you look at The Millionaire Couple Next Door, which was a book from some years ago on the right, the millionaire couple next door didn't make more than $250,000 a year, but their net worth had climbed to close to 4 million. And why? If you look at their likes and dislikes, the likes are living below the means, budgeting, investing heavily in education, investing into the market, at least 20% of the realized income. They don't like profligate spending. They don't like having no margin for error, laziness, and excuses. So, while, a lot of us aren't going to make what Nicolas Cage made, $150 million that got squandered. We can be that millionaire next door that's bringing in a reasonable income, but investing a significant amount of it and budgeting significantly. When we think about budgeting, what you find is that people end up losing a lot of money a year in things that they either don't need or don't really use. And some of the bigger examples of these are like gym memberships, which I am not against, but too often people take a gym membership and then don't use it. Things like wasted food is a huge one in this country and a particular pet peeve of mine. Gambling, coffee, I'm going to talk about more in a minute. Cable TV, not even just cable TV. How many boxes do you have in your house? How many DVRs do you have in your house? Are you watching all these channels? Are you watching all these streaming services? Lottery tickets is a big one. So, it's estimated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics that 18% of our average yearly income is wasted on these little expenses, things that we don't even realize that are taking up such a big part of our budget. Now, I said I would talk a little bit more about coffee. I think it's a very interesting concept. And coffee is very popular, and this thing, stay away from my coffee. It doesn't feel like a lot of money being spent every day, but it adds up over time. And what if you had instead invested the money? So in this example, we took the $2.95 per day coffee. I think a lot of people are probably spending more than that if they're going to Starbucks or Dunkin' or some of these others. In 5 years, you will have spent over $5,000 on coffee. 10 years, 10,000, 20 years, 21,000, and 40 years, you'll spend $43,000. So over a career, let's say you work from 25 to 65, you don't make the coffee at home, you don't take advantage of the free coffee in the office, you go out and you buy $3 a day, you're spending $43,000 over your career on coffee. Now, what if you instead invested the $3 a day? And And I used a very modest 6% return. You'll see in almost all of these examples, I used a 6% return. When the market historically returns 10 to 12. I just didn't want people to say to me, your numbers are unrealistic. I wanted to use even less than what has been realistic numbers. Anyway, if you invest the $3 a day for 40 years, it climbs to $177,000. So would you rather ingest $40,000 worth of coffee or invest that money and end up with significantly more? Now, it doesn't have to be coffee. I'm just picking on it because it's an obvious one. I too like coffee, although I tend to make it myself. Think about anything that you spend. Every purchase you have has an opportunity cost, meaning you can't use it. Once the money's gone, you can't use it for something else. The bigger the purchase you make, the bigger the opportunity cost. This concept came around because I had read somewhere that when people inherit money, let's say they inherit $100,000, within 14 days, they spend it on a car. Right? That was what the stat said. And I got to thinking, well, if you had $100,000, how would you advise someone what to do with it? And, let's say people are going out and buying that car we have listed down at the bottom, the $83,000 car. So you buy that $83,000 car or $84,000 car, if you round it, you have $16,000 then to invest in the market. And so in 8 years, you've got an old car. After 30 years at a 6% return, you just about get that 100,000 back. Well, if you really needed a car, why don't you buy that $23,000 car and then invest the 77,000? Again, in 8 years, you have an old car, but that 77,000 climbs to 468,000 over time, over 30 years, again, at a 6% return. So, every purchase has an opportunity cost. The larger the purchase, the bigger the opportunity cost, because you don't have the ability to let it compound and grow over time. Other things I talk to people about, deferring gratification. A lot of people go out and they get these credit cards and then they think that becomes their personal piggy bank. The problem is if you impair your FICO score, which is calculated based on the 5 criterion that I show on the left here. How much do you owe? How much new credit do you have? The length of your credit history, your credit mix, really importantly, most importantly, your payment history. If you're making purchases on your credit card because you can't defer your gratification, you're not staying up to date on paying off that credit card, it's gonna impair your FICO score. And the more you impair your FICO score, the higher the loan will ultimately be for you, whether on the right side left, I show buying a new home with a $500,000 loan, or on the right of that, I show buying a new car on a $20,000 loan. It could be a pretty significant difference. If on that $500,000 loan, if you're an exceptional borrower, and this was before rates moved, so this was a last year example, your 4.5% interest, your total interest on that is $413,000. But if you're down in that risky area, the rate's going to be 1% higher, and now you're paying $527,000 in interest. That's a big difference, right, on a single loan. And so protect that score. Defer gratification. Don't go don't go buying things on your credit card if you can't pay it, because it will come back over time to haunt you. We talk about investments. I really didn't want to overcomplicate things with regards to investments. People ask me, how do you invest your money? Look, there's a lot of different ways to answer that question, but I think the things that I find important, first, have an emergency fund. We'll spend a few minutes talking about that emergency fund. Second, you don't have to be safe to succeed. In fact, it's the opposite. And it's often hard to get that through to people who are not advanced investors. Diversification works. Automating. I like to spend time on that. Automating your investments could be a really great strategy. Minimize taxes. Be wary of hot tips. have a plan and stick to it, seek advice. So we'll go through a few of these. I always think, you build your emergency fund. People ask, well, what should I have in an emergency fund? I think it's pretty simple to think about it. What does it cost you to live in a month? And here's just an example of the average American. What does it cost them to live in a month for these different things? Times, if you were to lose your job, how long do you think it would take you to find a new one? Do you think you'd find a new one in less than 4 months, which is the average in this country? Do you think it would take you 6 months? Do you think it would take you a year? And so what is your monthly cost of living times, if bad things were to happen in the job market, how long would it take you to get back on your feet? So if it's costing you $4,500 to live a month and you're worried that you could be out of work for a year, well, let's multiply them and say, okay, we're going to have $54,000 in emergency that we don't touch. And for a lot of people, that number is going to be higher, but just an example of how families can think through, before we even start investing, let's get this emergency fund set up. We talk about you don't have to be safe to succeed. I look at what markets did from 97 to 2021, so that 25-year period. You look at the left, CDs yielded 2. So, bank deposits, certificates of deposits yielded 2%, really safe asset, obviously a bit higher now. Inflation was 2% over that period. Your real return was nothing, right? That's thinking about, well, what was I able to make versus what was the increase in inflation over that time? You basically just ran on the treadmill of life. You didn't make enough to outpace the increase in cost of living, which is inflation. Now, if you bought things like bonds over the last 25 years, you would average about 4%, then inflation of 2, your real return is 2%. So you improved your position a bit. Now, if you look at US equities over the last 25 years, you returned 10 versus inflation of 2. So you were scaling new heights. Your real return was 8%. And so when people talk about risk, I often say, look, a risk is that you're just running on the treadmill of life. A risk is that you're only barely improving your position. And taking on some risk in markets historically means scaling new heights. And so you don't have to be safe to succeed. Now, even this period, 97-01, people say, well, am I going to get 10%? Very tumultuous period. Tech wreck, 9/11, global financial crisis, Brexit, COVID, all of these things, and yet you still return 10% a year in the equity markets. Stocks outperform most asset classes. So if you look, this time we go back to 1979, and we compare stocks to bonds, to gold, to real estate. Stocks did much better. And then if you look on the right, it's how often do stocks outperform bonds? So people always remember downturns in stocks. They remember tumultuous periods. But again, you invested $100,000 in the S&P 500 in 1979. Today, it's worth almost 15 million. And the chart on the right is showing you over most periods, stocks outperform bonds. Now, the longer you're in stocks, the more likely you are to outperform bonds. So it's all back to the idea of you don't have to be safe to succeed. You're better off taking some risks in the portfolio. Automate your investments. What I like about automating your investments is you're paying yourself first. So before you do anything, you bring money in, it automates, goes into the market. It's out of sight, out of mind. You can set it and forget it, and it builds time in the market. Even the difference between, what's the difference between just, making those monthly contributions where you're not even thinking about it versus, I'll invest once a year. So the dark blue line is, what if you make a payment every month, invest it in the market every month, not make a payment, invest in the market every month, your money grows. Now, what if you're the light blue line and instead you do it annually? You end up with less. And I assumed in this multi-decade period, maybe there are 5 years you miss. Maybe there was a recession that scared you. Maybe it was the year you got married. Maybe it was the year you had a kid. You just invested annually and you decide a few times you're not going to invest. You do far better if you get that money into the market every couple of weeks or every month, because it's the time in the market that matters most. So think very hard about automating your investments. You then don't have to worry so much about the timing of when you're going to invest. The longer you own an asset class, the more likely it'll exhibit the characteristics for which you bought it. Yeah, there are short-term periods where you may be surprised by what wins, but over the long term, it's pretty obvious or historically pretty obvious what wins. So how often do bonds outperform cash? Over any 3-month period, 60%. Over any 10-year period, 100%. How often do stocks outperform bonds? Over any 3-month period, it's only 64%. Over any 10-year period, 91%, and so on. So the longer you own something, the more likely it'll exhibit the characteristics for which you bought it. Far too often, people will buy something only not to stick around for it to do what they thought it was going to do. Markets, this just says markets historically perform well after people freak out. So when the herd is freaking out, running out of the market, like 87, like 2002, like 2008, like COVID, the market did very well in the 12 and 18 months after everybody ran out of the market. What are some of the big decisions you need to make? I won't go through these, but just we have checklists for married couples. What are some of the things they should think about in terms of getting their finances in order? Updates, any new considerations, checklists for new babies. These were some of the things that I had to think about. What's pre-delivery going to cost me? What do I need to do when I'm in the hospital? What should I do in the first 30 days, like opening 529 savings plans? What do I do beyond the first month, like writing a will, funding retirement accounts, adjusting the beneficiaries? This one's just to say, if you have a good loan, a lot of people locked in loans at 3% for their homes. People say, should I pay down my house or should I get it in the market? Historically, you've been much better getting it in the market. Now, if you're taking a loan at 7% right now, you may want to pay down some of that. But if you're one of these people that had a 3% loan or so, and you could think you could do better in the market. Historically, the market does better than home prices. So the right is the rolling returns of the market versus the left, the rolling return of home prices. How do we protect all of this? Look, we're protecting against breaking down on the journey. We're protecting against dying too soon, living too long. So we want to make sure that if we break down, we have healthcare directives, power of attorney. We want to make sure we have life insurance. If we live too long, we want to make sure that we have long-term care. So the things that we can set up so that we don't become a burden on anyone. Bear the risks you can afford. Don't overinsure yourself. Insure the risks you can afford, like your family's well-being, your health, your house and land, etc. And, even when you're protecting, even when you're in that retirement, make sure you don't just go all to bonds. That bottom line is the growth of your portfolio with a withdrawal rate in bonds. You run the risk of running out of money. In equities, you do well. That's the top line. But even if you were to do a 50-50, you would sit right in that middle. Now, how do we distribute all of this? First of all, make sure the next generation's trained. I won't go through all of this, but this is some of the things that you should be teaching the next generation at certain points. What does your family value? Make sure everybody understands that. The best way not to squander money on small purchases is to know what we value. My wife and I tell our kids we value experiences and we value education. And so don't be squandering your money at the mall. We'll invest in things you want to be good at. We invest in our daughter's tennis, we invest in trips, but we're not squandering the money. Nurture your family's true assets. Like I said, we ask our kids, what do you want to be good at? and we'll help invest in that. And finally, structure the inheritances appropriately based on, goals, not emotional needs, promote self-sufficiency, but certainly don't neglect any signs that your children are poor money managers. So I'm going to pause there. Bill, if you don't mind, are you there, Bill? May I just
I'm
run to
here.
the bathroom for 1 second? I'll be right back.
Yeah, sure. And so, folks, as was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, if you do have any questions, please email those questions to Cornerstone WM, no dots in that, all strung together, Cornerstone WM at LPL.com. Those questions will come to me. I'll relay those to Brian, and we can get them answered. The other thing I do want to mention is your financial advisor can help you have these conversations with your children. It's definitely part of the job that they do for you is educating that next generation, as Brian mentioned, just having that ability to make sure that they're good stewards of wealth and helping them along the way. And by the way, this presentation that Brian just went through is available to your financial advisor. They do have access to it. It's a PDF. And so if this was something that you wanted to share with your kids, we will make sure that your financial advisor has that available and can distribute it to you. So again, very good information to be sharing with your children. The last thing I do want to mention is, we do really appreciate you taking time out of your day. We know that attending these webinars, there's certainly other things you can be doing, and our goal is always to educate you and to be sure that our financial advisors are just meeting every need that you possibly have. And I will tell you, there's a lot of surveys out there that say that for a lot of investors, and that goes all the way up the economic scale from ultra high net worth investors down to, folks who, have just scrimped and saved every day of their life. One of the biggest concerns that investors really have is not how much am I going to make this year in the markets. It's not necessarily how the accounts are going to be set up, but it's really what's going to happen to my kids when they inherit this money. So please engage your financial advisor. Certainly let them help you have these conversations with kids, and that's certainly something I know that they would take great pride in. Brian, are you back?
I'm back.
Awesome. So Brian, I have one quick question for you. And this is actually, so you did mention that I needed to have you deliver this presentation to my kids, and I think you're right. Are you available Saturday, say around 10 a.m. Central?
I might have a tea time.
Okay, that's understandable. Well, I will tell you that as you were speaking, my wife is watching this, and I got a text from her that said, we need to give this presentation to the kids again. So, nice. I think your message is definitely resonating with the folks that we have out listening right now. Brian, I'm not seeing any questions right now, but let me ask one question of you that I have on my mind. Obviously, there's some great content in here. I think pictures always communicate a lot better than words or lectures. So I mentioned to everyone that this is available, that their financial advisor can get this information to them. In your experience, as you've been delivering this content with financial advisors, really probably close to, it's coming up on probably 10 years at this point, would you say that there is a best way of delivering this to that next generation, or maybe some best practices that you would share of ways for folks to start these conversations with their kids or grandkids?
Well, I think a lot of it is how do you engage them in the conversation? So rather than somebody such as myself or you, Bill, presenting it for 35, 40 minutes, actually engage them. Say, you say to them, if what do you value? What do you think the purpose of money is? Have you ever defined what that is as a family? Or what do you think your kids think the purpose of the money is? What do you think have you ever explicitly told them what it's for? You can certainly say to a younger generation or anyone, what do you spend your money on? What are some things that you spend your money on that you would consider wants versus needs? And how much value do they add to your life? How much happiness do they add to your life? Whether that's a big purchase such as a car, or whether that's a small purchase. And I'm just thinking about it because the way my daughter spends her money on acai bowls and cosmetics, right? Like, how much value does that add? You know, like, is there some ways that we can put off these purchases and think about, you know, getting them into the market, or getting that into your savings? So anytime you can include people in it, make it personal to them, right? Sit there and think through, even quiz them. You know, if you had if you drank $3 of coffee a day, you know, how much you think that costs you in a year, right? How much, you know, and just engage them in it, and surprise them with numbers. People like to know, you know what, if you didn't pay $3 a day in coffee and you invested it in the market, you'd have close to 200,000. You know, to a young kid, 200,000, it's a lot of money. Yeah, stop going to Starbucks, right? And so, to me, those are the types of best practices. We all have to put our own personality into these things, but I find those to be good practices.
Yeah, I think introducing that concept of time value of money in a way that doesn't feel like math is probably a good thing to do.
Right.
Brian, we do have one question that came in about college costs and spending for college. You and I, during the pre-webinar, were talking a little bit about college costs and just how expensive that is. And as someone who has two in college and one not too far removed from going into college, I can absolutely attest it is a very expensive time in someone's life. When do you think it's a good idea to maybe start having the conversations with the kids about, you know, just that that conversation, you know, and I would say that probably includes you know, the value of the education, but also the value of what's being spent on that education. Is one school worth more than another? You know, one other way to maybe think about it is, you know, that this isn't an ever-flowing river of money. And, you know, is there decisions that you can engage the child with? When would you start to have those conversations?
Well, I mean, where I thought you were going with this is, when do you start thinking about investing the money? And I would say in utero, or even before, if you can think about funding those 529 plans. One of the biases that we know to have is that we keep all of our accounts separate in our mind, right? That's not necessarily a good thing, but we don't paint a full profile. So we keep all those accounts separate. So if you have over here, you've automated a 529 plan, you don't think about it all that much. You have it in the broad market or somewhat diversified across markets. You know, that's probably going to grow beyond what you realized, or is growing beyond what you realized. And so hopefully when there's time for college, you've built up some balance in the 529, that when you're paying out, you know, you didn't consider it, because these are the accounts you consider versus this one that's over here. So, you know, you if you start early, the same applies with the 529 plan now, and automated, similar concepts. Now, look, I mean, it's a different answer for everyone. You know, if you're what we know is the more degrees you get, the higher your lifetime income is on average, the less likely you are to be unemployed on average, right? So I still believe in education. Now, is there a big difference between the $20,000 education at your state school or the $70,000 education at the private college that has the good football team? I don't know. I mean, that's a different answer for everyone, but people should think about, you know, you should sit down with the kids and say, this is the additional amount that we'd have to spend, and it's not just that. The difference between a $20,000 school and a $70,000 school isn't $50,000 a year. It's the lost ability to invest that 50,000, right? So what could that grow to over time if in 4 years I'm putting $200,000 in the market for you, right? I could hand you that 200,000 at the end if I have it, or I could invest it for you over time, right? So it's the conversations, making sure they understand the trade-offs, making sure that they understand what else could be done with the money. And the other thing is, is there a big difference between the lifetime earnings or the lifetime happiness or the lifetime success rate of the different schools? Sometimes hard to quantify, but sometimes kids fall in love with schools and they're not even necessarily sure of the reason why they fall in love with that school.
For sure, for sure. Well, Brian, I can't thank you enough. This was outstanding, and I do want to just reiterate, if any of you listening today, you like the material, you like the visuals that were a part of this presentation, we will make this available to your financial advisors. So please reach out to them if you would like the information to share with, again, child, grandchild, whatever the case may be. The other thing I will mention is this webinar was recorded. So once it goes through all of the LPL compliance, this should be available to you to where, again, you could share this video with a child or a grandparent or a grandchild, or a friend or family member that you think it would be useful for. So hope everyone enjoyed this today. And again, Brian, I really thank you for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Nice seeing you again, Bill.
Same here. Take care.
Take care.